A very good, I think it's morning still. Good afternoon. Thank you so much to the BBC leadership under the President just for calling us to have this engagement. I want to start by just acknowledging that if we can take a step backwards, do we understand the extent of the problem we are actually in from an economic perspective? The level of quagmire, the inequalities that we are facing. I know it would be nice for us to just talk, have a panel discussion, go and sit down, you clap, you did your bit as a panel. But we're really at the precipice of a cliff. We cannot leave these type of discussions like any other discussion. I'm going to do two things. I'll explain what the National Empowerment Fund has achieved, but in the context of that, I'll also explain what DFIs historically have actually been doing in this country and what they can actually do and the role that they can play in actually transforming the economy. I'll take it a little bit back, but also look at the two parallels of the current. One thing that I have seen is that when you actually have development finance institutions that are put in place that understand the seriousness of the underdevelopment, the lack of transformation in terms of inclusivity, or if you want structural transformation, that could be the number of firms, the extent of firms' involvement in the economic value chain, depending on the sectors, or the change in the composition of sectors, i.e. you want to grow your manufacturing, you want to grow away from agriculture, you want to industrialize, you want to ensure that you have value-added sectors where you process. That's wherein you then say, what are the appropriate instruments that we need to put in place to do that? So the stats are there in terms of where we are. I'm not going to get into that. We know where we are on all the underdevelopment woes, the inadequacies, the unequal development, the spatial patterns, unemployment, income inequality, wealth inequality. We know the issues. But the question is, if we understand the gravity and the seriousness of underdevelopment and inequality, the question we must ask ourselves here, these financial institutions, are the instruments that they actually afforded adequate? And I think not. I must be categorically clear to say that I do not think that the instruments that we are deploying are sufficient because the problem we have would not be the problem we have. What did the apartheid government do? Pre-94, we know they set up Piwa's organization. The IDC, they were Afrikaner nationalists that sat in a room. There's a whole lot of them from the Smuts, Herzog era. I'm not going to go into that history. They agreed, we've got to set up industries to finance our development. We've got a male Afrikaner problem of unemployment. We cannot leave everything to the private sector. The private sector has the role of ensuring high profit, maximizing shareholder value, but also it doesn't look at the underdevelopment woes and the issue of agency. It doesn't have the same imperative as the state. So what they did was they said, we'll focus on let's set up an entity where we can capitalize the IDC, ensure that the IDC targets sectors. We have Industrial Policy Action Plan. It finances almost 14 sectors. 14 sectors means you have no priority. That's the reality. You also have master plans. It have more than 14 sectors or equivalent. That means you have no priority. So the first thing we have to do, even as policymakers, as decision makers, what are the key strategic thrusts in terms of sectors that will change the game for us? We've got to decide. There are also value opportunity sectors that are going to enhance employment generation. We're sitting with an unemployment crisis. So we cannot ignore that. So the fundamental underdevelopment has to go hand in hand with dealing with the social problem at hand. So they dealt with land. They took the land. We know they expropriated everything. I won't go to the acts. They said, okay, let's deal with the technology. They financed the CSIR, ARMSCO. They also financed research and development through universities and so forth. That's the technology component in education. They skilled through TVET colleges. And not just universities. Then they said, we need capital. We need to finance these entities that we think need to come on board. And they also decided what those entities were. We spoke about ISCO earlier. One of the candidates was asking. We spoke about SASOL. There are various entities. I'll talk about SAPI, the rusk that you eat, OMA. Those things were funded by the IDC. for years. They agreed, let's make losses for about 5-10 years. Some of these businesses won't generate profit in the first year, not even in the second year. But they agreed that for a period, we will, because of our strategic thrust, we don't want to rely on the international markets. We don't want, when sanctions come, because there were sanctions coming, we don't want to rely on Iran for oil or whoever else for oil. We actually want to develop our own refineries and value stream in the gas, petroleum, and oil sector. That's why we have Sasol today. It's because the state decided. The apparatus of the state then funded the development, and that means the capitalization has to be sufficient to deal with the underdevelopment problem. So the NEF, what we have done, we've been funded about 2.4 billion since to date. We are supposed to fund all black business in all 9 provinces. I'm not complaining. We have funded about 1,600 just under businesses and firms. Our cap is around 75 million. We don't go there because of our balance sheet, which is highly constrained. We have funded 30% of about disbursements that we have had over the last, I'd say, since inception. 30% of those go to women-owned businesses. And we've also said, as the NEF, there's specific sectoral targets that we have that we seek to intervene. We've had over 120,000 jobs created in that and 14 billion of deals approved as the National Empowerment Fund. Is that adequate to move the needle, given the underdevelopment and the exclusion that black people have had over the last, we know, 350 years? No, by far not. So the solution for me would be to say, are we deliberate from a strategic thrust in this regard? Where we have to look back is to say, how do we recapitalize sufficiently and adequately these entities that are supposed to drive industrial development? If you were to go forward now, as I wrap up, and you go back to the amount that was invested in Sasol, Sasol was given 50, 70 years ago, 10 million rands. Today's proportionate value, that's over $1 billion. Imagine NEF funding one black business for $1 billion. We don't have that capital even for the whole NEF. So this is the kind of capital, if we want to create listed entities, if we want to ensure that we have a transformative inclusion into corporate elites, but also having market share of new entrants, we have got to start reviewing whether our instruments are adequate and not just talking as though everything is hunky-dory. We are on the precipice of a cliff and we need to review the way we engage these discussions. Thank you.